program this morning should be of major interest. I'm going to, in a moment, the moderator this morning will be Paul O'Shea, and he will come up here in just a second. I want to go ahead and also say that on the program this morning, Kent Massey from Massey Associates, who obviously is involved in the layouts of both these major projects. Nancy Bunn, who is the secretary of the Executive Mansion, I guess it's called the Illinois Executive Mansion Association, is with us this morning. And Gary Clayton, the CEO of Illinois Realtors, is with us this morning. So at that point, I am going to turn it over to Paul O'Shea for this morning's program. I forgot the signal.
Oh, that's the signal. Okay, how about this microphone? Does that work okay? All right, well, we'll see. I probably won't be able to move through my portion as fast as Bob did with his, but I'll do what I can. It's going to be kind of a whirlwind 50-year history that I'm going to give to you here, so hang on. And we're going to begin 1968. December 3rd, 150th anniversary actually of statehood that day. And we're looking in just next year, we've got 200 coming up. But so that was the day of the rededication after great efforts by the Ferry and Henderson firm leading the reconstruction of the old state capitol. I stood on the sidewalk outside that day with my friend and fellow architect, Augie Wisnowski, who we both spent some time on this project. However, October 1st, we started our own firm of Graham, O'Shea, and Wisnowski, so we were not taking part in the actual program. But that was not all bad, because the following year, 1969, we began our own firm by having a contract from Mr. Fred Neighbors of the Mansion View Motel. And he approached us as serving as architects for a major addition to their motel across the street overlooking the governor's mansion. And which we got a phone call from Governor Ogilvie and his wife Dorothy and asked us to come meet with them as they expressed their concern for privacy and security on the design of this extension of the Mansion View Motel with all of its windows, et cetera. So we were very successful in satisfying everyone's concern, and the project moved forward. Go to next year, 1970, after the 1969 project with the Mansion View. In 1970, we received a call again from the Governor Ogilvie and his staff, this time, asking us to serve as architects for the major renovation of the governor's mansion, which is obviously in a very deteriorating condition, and that was evidenced by the structural shoring that was on the first floor throughout the building. So we continued with our role as the architects for that project. And you see here the results of that turned into something that actually doubled the size of the original building, accommodating some additional public space and also some family quarters, and then also utilizing the carriage house for some of the security features as well. So that was quite a major program that has since sat without any attention for 45 years. And now, fortunately, we are seeing that attention moving forward. Advanced to 2002, and Mayor Hessera and some of the community members had created the Strategy 2020 program. And a follow-up to that was seeking out from the National American Institute of Architects the Regional Urban Design Assistance Team, which had been known for its success in many other cities across the U.S. And so they did agree to sponsor a team to help with us in downtown Springfield, and they brought 8 professionals to the city, and these were from all over the U.S. And they were also architects, landscape architects, urban planners, neighborhood planners, financial planners, the whole works. They spent 4 to 5 days and nights. They worked kind of through the night sometimes, and they left behind an 84-page program of work, so to speak, to advise us as to some recommendations, including the Capitol Avenue corridor, which they call the Ceremonial Boulevard from 2nd from the Capitol to 19th Street. And on their major projects list, followed behind that was the Jackson Street Trail, as now we refer to as the Jackson Street Corridor. So those projects were moving forward as such. And in 2003, then Mayor Davelin appointed me to chair this RUDAT follow-up committee to follow through on these programs. So the Capitol Avenue project advanced through 3/4 of its stages, leaving just the 2nd to 5th Street project, which does tie in a little bit to some of the other features that are going on now as we relocate buses to the multimodal site. All of these are big picture items that really need to be kept in mind as we move forward. So as I served as chairman of that RUDAT committee, then in 2006, the mayor actually brought me on board at the city as the city's planning and design coordinator. So one of the, obviously then the next phase of that project was, let me move back just a minute, to the concept of the follow through with the Jackson Street corridor. Well, we looked at the mapping, and the corridor was designed to interconnect the Lincoln home to the Capitol complex from 8th Street to 2nd Street in conceptual way, which included the Jackson Street in most of those cases, except between 5th and 6th Street. And that happened to be privately owned property, which the Illinois Realtors now come into the picture as we discussed with Gary Clayton the prospects for what could we do with that section. And he said, well, the properties are in private ownership, family ownerships. Their family members are all over the country, hard to pull them together. Marine Bank has the trustees, trust account, which the trustees are all over the country. So this is becoming a little bit of an issue to try to acquire that property. Well, it was a couple of years later or more when I got a tap on the shoulder at the UIS event, and there's Gary Clayton. He says, Paul, we need to talk. We just acquired those properties. So I was in his office immediately after that. And so we began to discuss where we go from that point forward. But then meanwhile, in 2008, our friend Bob Gray, always one for a nice new big idea. So he thought it was a good idea to have a recognition event, recognizing the 40th anniversary. Remember, 1968? Now we're into 2008. And so we put together an Old State Capitol rededication event with the help of Justin Blanford, holding this event at the Old State Capitol. And it was a great, nice evening event, food and drinks and so forth. And we recognized those architects, engineers, contractors, the owners from the state of Illinois at that evening event. And we charged maybe $20, $25. Well, the next day we found out we had $390 left over. We thought we should do something historic with this. So, which I walked into John Strimsterfer's office at the Community Foundation for the Land of Lincoln, and so I'm holding this money in my hand, and I said, John, you know, we should be able to start an account here, shouldn't we, for the historic preservation with the Community Foundation. Well, he said, graciously, he accepted this money, and he said, well, let's start what we might call a acorn account, from which giant oaks grow, of course. And that acorn did grow into over $75,000 right now with that account. So it kind of reinforces the long-standing feeling that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, but the next best time is today. So that is part of the process of moving forward with that. And it was just then we did accumulate some funds, and within a few years, we started to issue some grants. And the second grant that we issued was for design concepts for the Jackson Street corridor, bringing on Massey and Associates to help us with that prospect. And from that, then we have a great results, which are shown here in the program that they put together in the booklet and so forth, and we'll hear from Kent on that. In the meanwhile, the fourth part of the puzzle came about with the RUDAT, and part of the recommendations of the RUDAT was to create the Office of the Capitol Architect. And so Richard Alsop came in from North Carolina to fill that position, and one of the first duties that he took on was developing a Capitol complex master plan. And that advanced to about an 80% completion stage until Governor Blagojevich did his thing, So that ground to a halt. But the one thing they concluded in that early stage was that the complex would not extend to the east of 3rd Street. And so it's that premise that we moved forward with some of our RUDAT commissioners, Tim Mapes working with the state, and Mayor Davlin worked with Secretary of State Jesse White in the Office of Planning and Economic Development, Mike Farmer working with the appraisal process. So by 2014, that site was acquired. And so that's in a process of review, but that is the end of my rather long 50-year history, but I tried to make it short. Thank you. Kent Massey, take the floor. Woo! I said the microphone, take the floor. with that.
Is that on?
Yeah.
Put it over here.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Good morning. Paul has moved us up to 2014. When our firm was asked to do this 5-block study for Jackson Street, and I would be remiss in not recognizing 2 gentlemen who represented my 2 clients in this project. Josh Collins, representing the Chamber of Commerce, and John Stremstifer with the Community Foundation were very instrumental in this project. We had 3 major subject areas of the project. One, as Paul mentioned, was connectivity, connecting Lincoln's home to on the east, to the Capitol complex on the west. This would include little extensions to other cultural and historic sites in the downtown area, including the Hoagland Center here, the Illinois Executive Mansion, nearby the Vachel Lindsay House, the Isles House, the Dana Thomas House, and Supreme Court. The second subject matter of this scope was to be storytelling. It was felt that there needed to be some, oops, as we adjust. I guess this is set for somebody else. I'll lean over. It was to tell a story. We have a lot of museums in this town, but very little outdoor interpretation for visitors. So we wanted to tell a story not only of the development of Springfield and of Illinois, but really help people find their way around, especially our visitors in the South Downtown area. The third subject matter was to develop an alternative urban space, which Paul was referring to, for this. This would be pedestrian-oriented. It would be a companion corridor to the more ceremonial Capitol Avenue, to have a shaded kind of strolling, casual corridor adjacent to that could be used for some outdoor gatherings, visitor events, and so on. I view this as a linear park, was the concept. So all 3 of these subject matters kind of come together to make the downtown, to add something to the downtown urban environment and to make it a better place to visit, to live, and to have businesses and own real estate. I have to recognize the real estate people over here. 3 major challenges arose early in the process of the study that are illustrated on this old plat of downtown. As Paul mentioned, Jackson Street, from the beginning of time when Mr. Isles laid out the south part of downtown, never existed between 5th and 6th Street. It was never platted. The people, even back in Lincoln's time, would have to either go down to Edward Street to the south to get around, or they'd have to go up to Capitol Avenue to get around. You may ask, why was this? Well, because the Town Branch Creek, which then was an open creek meandering through downtown, kind of went through this area, and we think that's the reason it was never platted as a street. So that posed a real problem right at the beginning. Jackson Street wasn't a complete street. The second challenge came up right away is that the Town Branch Creek is still there. It no longer meanders. In 1860, it was encapsulated in a brick sewer, which is about 8 feet in diameter as it goes through this area. And everything was covered over. And the creek no longer meandered through downtown, but it went straight through. Now, we have to look that was done in 1860, right during the Civil War. So 150 years have passed since then, and that 8-foot handmade sewer is still down there. What's happened in the 150 years? Well, you have to recognize the watershed of the Town Branch Creek encapsulates all of downtown Springfield, and it goes as far south as Isles Park, Ash Street. In 150 years, we've had a few roofs added in that area. We've had a few pavements added in that area. And thank goodness we have flushing toilets that have been added in that area. All of this is combined and goes into the sewer, which is an old combined sewer running through downtown. Periodically, this has problems. In a downpour, which now seems to occur more frequently, it's a political matter whether or not it's climate change or not, but we do have storm events more often, and what happens is it backs up, and we do have, as we all know sitting in this room, flood damage and occurrences occurring downtown. The lowest part in the downtown area is Jackson Street between 4th and 6th Street, subject of flooding. The third element that I wanted to point out that kind of came up right away is that another interruption in the corridor is that the 3rd Street crossing of Jackson will be closed very soon. This is due to the high-speed rail. This is due to the quiet zone, whichever subject matter you'd like to take there, but it will be closed and barricaded soon. So that kind of interrupted our flow through. But looking at this, if it moves over to 10th Street, then we have another green corridor or linear park possibility with the redevelopment of the 3rd Street tracks. This one page illustrates from the report that was done in 2014 the 3 challenges and how we had kind of addressed it. To the right is 5th Street, to the left is 4th Street, the Illinois Executive Mansion is the bottom, and at that time the YWCA was sitting to the north. Here you can see that we began looking at better pedestrian crossings at both 4th and 5th Street by extending the sidewalks, shortening the distance across those streets to allow better pedestrian movement. The big thing that came out of this was we were putting in for the first time pedestrian crossings at both 5th and 6th Street, or suggesting that in this proposal. Because there was never a street there, the city has never put in formal pedestrian crossings that are striped and marked and so on. So if you are crossing, like I did this morning, from the Realtors area over across the street, you're literally jaywalking. So that was the first thing, and that was very important because these were very critical locations we felt as far as the corridor. And I think you'll hear that later when Gary talks. You'll see, too, that we took liberty on this page to go outside of the Jackson Street corridor and to venture north of Jackson Street with a little triangular shape there, which, believe it or not, follows the old Town Branch sewer. Part of the concept here was that we wanted to show that that needed to be protected. It needed not to have buildings or trees planted on top of it. It's a precious element in our downtown area. But we could also begin introducing the idea of maybe some stormwater detention, some alternative pavements, and so on, that would not solve the flooding problem, but would help. By following the sewer line, we were also able to achieve, because of the blockage of the 3rd Street tracks, a kind of shortcut over to Capitol Avenue so that our corridor could continue on at least temporarily. It should also be noted that in this study we proposed, it was based upon something I was told, that the mansion used to have its main gate on Jackson Street. The address of the mansion is something or other, 400 Jackson Street. And so we decided, well, why don't we put suggested in this plan. Lo and behold, it soon become a reality. And the idea there too was that the area of this Jackson Street, which is now blocked off at both ends almost, could be temporarily converted to an area for pedestrian use and so on. And it would serve as an entry point for the mansion at times. Looking east, we then proposed a street-like extension that Gary Clayton will get into going east and looking at a street-type plaza pedestrian area that would connect 5th and 6th Street and possibly could be extended either way from that. The Illinois Realtors, as Paul pointed out, attended a lot of the stakeholder meetings during the preparation of this plan. And they mentioned they had acquired all this land adjacent to the north of their building. And we were knowledgeable of that, and they were knowledgeable of our efforts too. And then we proposed in that, therefore in the plan, is removing the drive-up bank building and creating the street-like plaza. So the essence of this whole thing is based upon the realtors' land, because that was the missing link in the whole thing. And it's kind of nice now to see that that's becoming a reality. And Gary will describe in a little more detail, and that the entrance to the mansion that Nancy will describe is also becoming a reality. So I think this goes a long ways to show that sometimes planning ideas done 20 years ago or so on, decades ago, can become a reality. I'd also like to point out what you're hearing is really all a matter of private monies and so on to date. We're not getting into the public aspect of this project right now, that the funding of the planning study and the two projects that are coming forth are really private initiatives that are making this a reality in downtown. So with that, I'll turn it over to Gary Clayton to kind of describe.
As Kent said, I'm Gary Clayton. I'm CEO of the Illinois Realtors, have been for, this is year 30, not that I'm counting. But one of the things I will mention that they sort of gloss over with Phil Childs and Bob and Paul and Kent, when they said they came to my office, they never left. They kept coming back until I said yes. And that, as you know, with most associations, involves a board. So our, and realtors in particular, are community-oriented. And with the bicentennial coming up, it was a perfect opportunity to us to give back to Springfield. And I think to give back in such a way that at least it will be longstanding, because it has been labeled as a legacy project by the Bicentennial Commission as well. So we're very proud of that, but realtors across the state are involved in 23 other historical sites on providing renovation. So it is an association that lives in the community and stays with the community. We were very excited about being a part of downtown Springfield too. So where everybody knows, we bought the land, or acquired the land, very self-serving, because we wanted to preserve the integrity of our building. And we got 96 parking places out of it as well. So what we will have is a plaza that will be closed to vehicular traffic, except for one area, meaning you can't enter this from 5th Street, nor can you enter it from 6th Street. So there's an alley that we don't control, and we have to keep that open, and that will allow for not only emergency access vehicles, but also staging vehicles, depending upon what events are going on there. So we're excited about that. You'll see, and you can see it, I'm going to show you a little bit more in detail, but when you start doing something like this, you get a lot of opinions. And I will say the city was actually very easy to work with, and they were on our building, so I hope they're that easy to work with on the area across the street. So When you look at the pavement itself, one of the things, and the town branch keeps coming up because we built a dam in our parking lot, but it's underground. That's going to be permeable pavers, which will allow for underground storage of 5,000 or more gallons of stormwater. So it will help that area that I get to watch flood every time it rains. So we're excited about that. One of the things that I think is key to this, and it was a key for us in making this decision. Having a walkway is one thing. Having a walkway that's meaningful is something else. And for us, there's 16, is that right? 18 towers. And those towers, obviously, one purpose is lighting. But that panel that's about 4 foot by 6 foot is the key ingredient here, because that panel, and it will be on every tower, will be a historical message that as people walk through, they will be able to learn something about Springfield in particular and the mansion. If you start in walking from 7th down to 6th and you enter, there will be some, and Justin Blanford's working on this, so his mind works far better than mine will ever. And it'll be about civil rights in particular as it relates to Springfield. So we'll come through, and then you get to the alley, and then on the next stage, we'll talk about some of the housing and some of the events that with the mills and everything that were there long, long time ago. And then as you evolve and keep walking, we'll just start with then, because we'll have a housing theme, we'll start talking about the People's House. And the People's House, and we'll have some panels about the history of the mansions, which we should, and the plan is then to tie into some of the events that are going to be at the mansion. So we're excited about that, and we think that's going to be a critical component. Here's the area that I always get myself in trouble with, but I'll try. The real question is, and what else is going to happen there? So we have signed and agreed with a memorandum of understanding with the city that the city has the first right to use that, subject to our approval as well, because it's still going to be private property. We're going to pay taxes, we'll maintain it, we'll do all these things. But if you look at the theme, we want the use to be community-minded, civic-minded. Now, does that mean sometime that, I don't know, what is it, Blues and Barbecue or something might be there? I don't know the answer to that. You know, the preference, obviously, with this center located here, and we've had some very, very basic conversations that some outdoor events could be over there, and we'd like to keep it that way, but the most important aspect of it being a still maintained, owned by a private organization is we get the right to say no. And as we all know, sometimes that's important. So we're very judicious in our use of our building to the community, and we will do the same with this plaza. But we want to make sure that the community has at least an opportunity and an appreciation for what we can bring to them. So I'm going to stick around. I'm sure there's a Q&A period at some time, but I'll, if I don't know the answer, I'll do my best to make it up. So, thanks.
I think you've created a party place over there, right? Good morning. I'm here to speak for the Illinois Executive Mansion Association. You're all aware of what's going on. The ground's been broken and the project is full steam ahead. What you may not know is what has gone into making this project. Some of you are aware, but I was thinking as I was preparing for today that thousands and thousands of hours have been spent on the planning of this project. There's been a strong collaboration throughout the state to develop all of the funding. There's been fundraising top to bottom, Peoria, Effingham, Rockford. It's taken everyone's efforts. In terms of planning, the governor, the first lady put together an A-team, and people have put their best efforts, collaborated, and brought it all together for the common good. So I like to say Springfield's in the catbird seat. We've benefited from all of this. So this is basically a rendering. You can see that the entrance will be from the north, ADA accessible for the first time. So behind the stairway would be the access. Let's see. And here you see an architectural drawing of what the north side of the mansion would be. So the gate at the top coming in, the path coming through to the entrance in the mansion, open green space, and we think that it will be very inviting, completely accessible, and just coming down Fifth Street, the vista will be attractive. So we're hoping that, for walking, et cetera, it's going to be an integral part, and certainly it's been critical to the revitalization of downtown. So here we are at the Executive Mansion in the evening. I cannot emphasize enough that it took great collaboration for this project to be a reality. And although the Mansion Association doesn't have an official position for the YWCA block, we're happy to answer any questions or be part of the participation in terms of what will happen across the street. We hope the project to the north of the mansion will be sensitive to what has been accomplished here. The new Executive Mansion, once it's open, will have a heavy emphasis on education. There will be a fine and decorative arts exhibit. It will be, for the bicentennial, it will open. We will have 20 pieces of the finest decorative arts available, created in Illinois, as well as fine arts from private collections and museums. Some you'll never have a chance to see again. I think it's going to be a tremendous draw during the bicentennial to have this world-class art exhibit in the mansion. In process is the visitor center. It will be state-of-the-art. I believe they're working with people who have either done some work at Epcot or with the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Museum. And that will be for all visitors, and then coming in, all of the tours at the mansion are professionally written and curated, so when you walk through, you're actually going to hear a lot of history, know what's happened in the past, the present, and what we anticipate happening in the future. It's had a kind of a storied history. The mansion itself was often a bit of a B&B at times, and certainly underutilized and neglected, but that has changed. And for the first time, it will be under the umbrella of the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency site superintendent, who will actually, I think of that as sort of the protector of the house, and hopefully will make a difference going forward. So I guess that's really about it. I guess it's time to open for a Q&A. But again, I'd like to emphasize the collaboration, particularly in Chicago. We have had the privilege of working with some of the very best of the best who have donated their time and their talents pro bono for this project. Didn't have to do it, but they did. And I think it was a large group working for the common good, and it's a success. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. At this time, I think what we'll do is bring all the presenters up and have a seat. And I don't know, maybe I won't have to stay at that microphone. So I might just ask a general question here before we go to the audience in terms of how you see your own scheduling for moving forward to the next step. Nancy, maybe how do you see the next step? Things are moving ahead right now in terms of physically. Go ahead and see what you see as the schedule.
Okay, the schedule, the mansion will be. Okay. That was an important question. I was supposed to answer that, and I didn't. So thank you. So the mansion will be open for the bicentennial. They're in full steam ahead creating a curriculum K through 12 for bicentennial education in the state, and it will be up and running and ready. Period.
Gary, do you?
I promise.
That schedule sounds familiar. We will start with a bid in July for the demo of the bank. And I learned something. I learn something every day on this project.
Oh, I'm sure of that.
You people that work on demo and don't do much except schools in the summer, and you got to wait till they get out of the school. So we will hopefully have that started in September. Our goal is to be done. We have to be done by August 26th. I've been told that so many times of 2018, but we will be done before that, and hopefully, May of 18.
Before you move on, Gary, if I could just comment about the fact that we really didn't leave your office, because I wanted to be certain that none of this new corridor would go past your window in your office, so that you'd have some privacy still. Kent?
Working on both of these projects, I can kind of tell you construction schedule. You're seeing the mansion right now, it's mostly, there's nothing in the house. Everything's been moved out, and they're in the process of doing some major demo inside, but also on the outside. The idea is that most of the site hard construction will be done this fall. A lot of the interior work will go over the winter, of course, and then hoping by spring we can finish the exterior and the site work and have it ready. The goal is really around Memorial Day. But as construction projects go, we'll have to see how it kind of does. And it parallels pretty much as Gary's project. Again, because we're using permeable pavement, we can do a lot of the work during the winter months for that, because it's not dependent upon temperatures so much. So we're hoping, again, that a lot of the demolition, excuse me, I shortened that, sorry. Demolition and the underground work can be done this fall, and then over the winter, the pavement and finishing touches of planting and furnishings later in the spring.
And we move on a little bit before we forget too much. It's been mentioned here occasionally about the city's involvement has been ongoing from very early stages, and it's been very helpful. And to see how the cooperative effort has helped to move these things forward. And again, the more input that we can all provide along the way with any project, it's always helpful. And again, I think looking at what the city's been able to do to help move these forward has been inspiring, frankly. Thank you. So, Bob, do you have some people with some questions?
Questions? Surely you've got a question.
Unfortunately, this isn't a question, it's just an observation. One of the things that we obviously are not here today to talk about is the big piece of property that's contiguous to this, what you've been discussing today. And I just want to bring up one thing. One of the challenges in this community, if you plan events, and there are a lot of people, outdoor events, there are a lot of people in this room that have been involved in this kind of thing. Please think about shelter and shade, because there isn't anywhere in Springfield that I know of where you can go outside and have an event, and if there's inclement weather or a threat of inclement weather or a drizzle, there's no way you can have an event when you have that kind of weather. And I think we need to think about that, because there's going to be some planning going on, and that next piece of property obviously has to complement this project.
And that's a good point, definitely. And getting back to the property across the block across the way, and how important it is, and you can see the importance and the consideration that has to go into that project. And certainly input has been important all along the way, and that shouldn't be ignored. And then it comes down to what's being analyzed right now, and there's so much to be considered. But as you have your own thoughts, there's no reason you can't still bring those forward. So I think that's always an opportunity with any of these projects. And that's what's been done right now when you talk about what's gone into these projects at this point. It's been a lot of conversation, a lot of input, the meetings with the people in the neighborhood and so forth. So, Bob?
Regarding the 150-year-old sewer, I heard it discussed once before that there would be plans, or hopefully there ought to be plans, that it would be refurbished in the middle of all this project, and I just didn't hear any assurance about that today. But isn't it true that this is a great opportunity to get down into the ground and rebuild something that's probably in need of great attention right now? And I wonder if that aspect is, I mean, can you confirm that, and citywide, or if it's Metro Sewer District, or who else is involved in that?
Yes, yes, yes. And yes. We all know it's there, and it is a combination of the sanitary district and the city. This part of the sewer belongs to the city, but obviously it goes into the sanitary district, so it's all part of the same thing. I see there's a couple engineers here. Yes, this is part of the discussion, and may be one of the reasons you're hearing a little bit of a delay, is that this is one of the rare opportunities in downtown Springfield to do a major infrastructure work on that piece. I brought it up. It came up in our early planning efforts. It's been discussed even with the mansion. We're and the realtors. Both of these projects, I should point out, are holding all of their stormwater on site and letting it go slowly. So we're all trying to take measures, and the city knows it's there. It's an old sewer. I don't think there are opera singers down there. But with it 8 feet at this point, by the time it gets down to where it daylights at Jan Douglas Park, I think it's 15 feet in diameter. So it is a major structure there. You have to remember, it's the Town Branch Creek. It's just simply put into a tube. So
It's also only constructed of brick, basically.
and there have been some inspections just recently. The manholes have been opened up, and people have gone down in there, and we're doing some television camera work and so on of the sewer.
We talked about opening it back up and maybe putting a casino or something on. Yep.
It's just, what do we do with this, the sewage?
Well, and you talk about long range plan in that regard. Just a second, and you open up, you daylight something like that, and create the creeks that you see in some of the other cities, including Champaign and so forth, to where you have the nice stone embankments, and you have to clean up the sewage, obviously, before you do that. But you still keep that in the long range. Steve?
I heard an interesting story following up on the sewer when it wasn't a sewer and it was a creek. We have to go back now to the beginning of Springfield. That this is where people went to swim in the pioneer days of Springfield. Was right there at the realtors area because it was an open creek, and you had to take a bath. That was where you went.
Steve?
Just might add a little bit about the sewer. The Springfield Sanitary District has engaged us to do a stormwater model of that sewer.
With the microphone.
Can you hear me better?
Yeah. Okay.
The city has, or excuse me, the sanitary district has started the first step of doing a stormwater model that would look at the capacity of this sewer. The sewer was gun-ited or repaired in the 70s, and so presumably they will be evaluating the condition of it as well. But the first step was this hydraulic model that looks at what the sewer can take, and that is underway for the sanitary district. Well, I'd add a little bit about it.
Steve, you're with Crawford, Murphy, and Tilley,
Yes.
and have had some involvement in this process, haven't you, at times?
I'm sorry, Paul.
And
what's
you've
the-
had some involvement with
Yeah,
that.
our firm has, and we're currently doing that stormwater model. Christie says it's for the city, not the sanitary district, but
Yeah.
we are doing a stormwater model to look at that sewer.
Okay, thank you. And thanks, John, for bringing this up.
This isn't a question either, it's more of a comment, and that is just to keep in mind, it's not just about accessibility for people. So to meet the code, it's also about usability. So right now, I know that Department of Justice through the ADA, that right now, parking in downtown Springfield does not meet code for people with accessible vehicles. And so I'm part of the Disabilities Commission, and we look at that, and so the city has to consider that. So I hope anything that we do that is parking related to this, that we try to jump up and meet the code, which means some cut-ins and changes in sidewalks. And I saw some of the bump outs on the screen, and that does meet it. But for those of you who are not somebody who uses that, there is no north-south parking in which someone with a vehicle where the ramp opens on the right, there is no parking in downtown Springfield. That ramp has to open into the street, which is quite dangerous. And then when we took the parking that was available on Jackson Street, we lost a lot of parking available for, so we meet the minimum standard on that because they look at the whole block in terms of the count, but it still doesn't make it, just because you meet the quote code doesn't make it usable. And then when you add some decorative elements, like the benches downtown, they're very beautiful, but they become obstacles. And so people with disabilities find it very difficult to park and use downtown in some of the way that things are laid out now.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I think that's a good, valid point. And I think parking has been looked at, discussed in relationship to some of these, but it's important to keep in mind on all projects. And frankly, the other thing that you're bringing out is that these types of comments are the type of the comments that are welcome really at any time and should be brought up at any time, even with Nikki and John and so forth. It's better to comment now than after it's done and then say, oh my golly, we should have done it this way, you know. So it's a good point. Kent?
I think another thing that falls in there is maybe the study that's underway now of converting some of the streets downtown to two-way will need to factor into that. So there's several parallel projects going along here. But what I'd like to go back to is the projects that we're mentioning here, as far as the Realtor project and the mansion, will, for the first time in history, you'll allow total accessibility from Lincoln's home all the way up and into the mansion, which has never been achieved.
You know, just a second, Bob. Another thing in the overall picture of this is what this area provides in terms of an opportunity for what this connectivity that we talk about, and that is the connectivity that can occur to bring people to this area who have come to the Lincoln Presidential Library Museum, park somewhere in that area, and then they get in their car and then they'll drive down to the Lincoln home or something like that. But with this type of activity being present in this area of the downtown, I think Bob Gray maybe have a little history on that when he was with the JCs. Maybe part of what you see in terms of developing this Jackson Street is a horizontal, let's say east-west street, but you have the opportunity then as they come along to one of those north-south streets to then make their way back up into the downtown area. And so the way that we handle everything in between is also just as important. For instance, the old State Capitol Plaza, and some things are being considered for that. So you have people, say, at the north end of where the Lincoln Library, Presidential Library Museum are, and they walk out the door and they look down, oh, that looks nice down there by the old State Capitol, and trees and people and activity and shops and things going on. And then they realize, well, also look at all that activity that's going on down in that area now. And that works two directions also. So that has a lot of vitality, hopeful for the future. And that's what we need to keep looking at in the future as well. And you know, in another regard, of course, the long term, we still keep in mind what's happening with 3rd Street, 10th Street, Multimodal Center, and that area of the town downtown also, and the activity area there. So just a side note.
You know, I've got a sense of the vision that we're talking about here, and in terms of how that fits into something that I think everybody, or at least I think is important to do in terms of the city. My question is, in terms of the development on the Y block, if the choice is that is going to be a private project that emphasizes commercial activity and residential housing, does that present challenges in terms of integrating that kind of a development with the types of things that you've talked about specifically, or the overall vision? You know, are there challenges there in terms of, if that's the choice, how does that fit with what you're talking about?
Working together.
Very good question, and it's a point that had the opportunity for a couple mayors to be involved in discussions. And I think as was pointed out by Nancy, with the entrance of the mansion being where it's going to be, and the plaza being where it's going to be, you certainly, and this is hard to say because I get paid to say other things, and it's hard to say that housing, particularly multifamily housing, may not fit properly there, given the total nature of all the work that's being done and the plan. Because in my discussions with the mayor and with the alderman, it is to make this a Springfield experience for the tourists and people that come to visit, where it's marked out on a route for them to visit everything, and maybe a trolley out to the tomb or whatever, but when they're here, not just for one event, but maybe for a day or a day and a half. So that's the long-term plan. So I think that has to fit within it. If I were, and I'm going to hand this over to you, from the mansion's perspective, I think that view of somebody from Capitol looking down to the front of the mansion, given all the work that's being done to accentuate the mansion, you certainly wouldn't want to block it. At least that's my perspective.
You know, part of the RUDAT report was so heavily on the Capitol Avenue and also with the Jackson Street corridor, and the connectivity between those two through even where that block is and to the view of the mansion becomes an important ingredient that it's on their docket, you know, and that's just because of input, you know, that has given that part consideration when the evaluation of the block itself goes on. And so that's why I think that's all part of the consideration. And Nancy, did you have?
I would agree. I think it's just the sensitivity issue. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yep.
Now? Now? Okay. So essentially, we know that this is a city project. I think it's another piece to the equation, but a wonderful opportunity. I think the downtown is going to be absolutely dynamic, and tourism should be on the uptick now that the mansion will be fully open, and with the plaza and the accessibility, it's all great things that are happening. But yes, the aesthetics I think it does matter in terms of looking north or south. So.
Hi, thank you so much for all of this investment that's happening downtown. You are exactly correct that this is going to be a major impact and a major great next phase of downtown. My question is kind of about the SStat report. Paul kind of ended a little bit with RUDAT and didn't get into SStat, which, as you remember, is the Sustainable Design Assessment Team. And it was AIA officials coming to Springfield and saying, how do you make downtown sustainable? Not from a green perspective, but from a how can it keep going and going and going on its own and we don't go down. And so, you know, we're talking a lot about tourism. How do these plans work with growing a residential neighborhood is my question.
Thanks, Lisa. By the way, that as you head up the DSI programs in a very good way, the way it's been progressing, and with your work with SStat as well, appreciate bringing that up. And it kind of slid through after the RUDAT. You know, the RUDAT was so successful. And as a matter of fact, we brought them back after 3 years, and they came in, the team came back and said, wow, they were just blown away for what had happened in a few years with that RUDAT. So they were after us to send this SStat, Sustainable Design Assessment Team, into Springfield, which we did, and they provided a great deal of help with just what you're saying. So I appreciate that and its considerations. Kent?
To build upon that comment or question, I think having nice and a variety of downtown urban environments will help improve it. right now, as part of the Realtor study, we kind of looked at within a block of there, how much vacant land, and I'm talking just parking lots primarily. There's something like 5 acres of developable area within a block of the Realtor Plaza. And if you look at that in form of housing, and infill housing or commercial housing, we have a lot of opportunity existing already in downtown Springfield. So I think having nice public spaces that are very versatile, multi-uses, from concerts to exhibitions to festivals to farmers markets and so on, that's all part of the urban environment that people want to move downtown. I think we have the space. It's a matter now of putting all the pieces together. Sometimes you have to start with the public investment first to bring along private investment there. But I think if we can illustrate the opportunities that exist downtown for housing and for commercial, does it have to go in this block? Yes, maybe, no, I don't know. I think that is the debate that's still ongoing.
One of the things that we have worked with in a couple of communities, and we would certainly work with the city on, is employer-assisted housing. And basically it's a walk-to-work program where it's the conversion of existing single-family houses, and they're available for the purchase, and folks that work downtown can live downtown and walk to work. So that's a program we have. I've shared it with the mayor. We'll certainly keep pursuing it because I think it revitalizes downtown from a housing perspective as well.
Also just in the overall, we're talking about economic development. I mean, that's really kind of the final product, is all that we provide brings the businesses here too, and the people and the businesses and the numbers that so many, when we bring people in to do particular developments, they want to see the numbers.
Let's get one more quick.
Okay.
What are the plans for pedestrian wayfinding? If we have all this world-class opportunities, again, these plans are very exciting, but let's make it easy for people to be able to wayfind. This topic came up during the Lincoln Bicentennial. Yes. And so I hope that there will be very easy, appropriate fitting wayfinding signs.
Good point, Marilyn. And Lisa may be able to address that some. You've been addressing some of that, haven't you, Lisa? With
we have a proposal out there
so.
for specific wayfinding in 6 to 10 different sites downtown. And it's kind of in the approval phase.
Yeah, so it's DSI, but it's a good point, Marilyn, and I think we need to keep it in mind as we go along. Oops.
See if there's any response and then wrap it up.
Just to echo that, in our visits with the alderman and the mayor on our project, that was a continuing topic. And we used the example, I think it's the Freedom Trail in Boston, where you can follow the logical movement. And at least I know there's conceptually support for that, and would be more than happy to work with you in your efforts with the city.
Just make sure it goes in front of my building. No, I'm just trying to quote some of you out there before you say it. Anything else, Bob? Okay, I think we have reached our 9 o'clock limit here, but I can't say enough about how well the presentations. We thank you all for that, and thank you all for your input.